All right. Okay, let's look at Daniel chapter 5. Daniel chapter 5. We are into the book of Daniel now. Very excited. Let's look at Daniel 5:5. Then I'm going to title this chapter and then we will move on. It says, in the same hour came forth fingers of a man's hand and wrote over against the candlestick upon the plaister of the wall of the king's palace. And the king saw the part of the hand that wrote. All right, so here, this chapter here, in chapter 4, we saw Nebuchadnezzar wrote his testimony out. All right. Now, chapter 5 jumps time, and now there's been a new king, and now this is Nebuchadnezzar's grandson, Belshazzar, as we're going to see. But in this message, and let me erase this. Let me get rid of this message first. There you go. All right, so in number 1, I title this message, Special Delivery. All right, special delivery or mail call. All right. Don't they do that in the military? Mail call, if you still get like real letters. All right. But this is a special delivery or mail call from God right to Belshazzar. This is top priority, and he couldn't deny the shipping. All right, so let's look at Daniel 5, verses 1 through 4. It says, Belshazzar the king made a great feast to 1,000 of his lords and drank wine before the 1,000. Belshazzar, whilst he tasted the wine, commanded to bring the golden and silver vessels which his father Nebuchadnezzar had taken out of the temple which was in Jerusalem, that the king and his princes, his wives, and his concubines might drink therein. Then they brought the golden vessels that were taken out of the temple of the house of God, which was at Jerusalem, and the king and his princes, his wives, and his concubines drank in them. They drank wine and praised the gods of gold and of silver, of brass, of iron, of wood, and of stone. Not good things. Not good things. Number 2, here we see Belshazzar defied and defiled God here. And you say, well, Mark, how did he defile God? He brought in the golden and silver vessels which were in the temple, and then he put wine in them and said, hey, let's praise the God of gold and the God of silver. Man, right in the face of God. So he defied God, and then he defiled God. Defied him and then defiled him. Daniel 5, 6 through 9. Here we see now, so you know what? We talked about last week in the animal instincts message on chapter 4, how sometimes pride, we don't even see the consequences coming, right? You know what? You get so wrapped up in self and you say, man, I got this. God can't stop me. Nothing can stop me. And then God stops you, even though he warned you multiple times. Well, here in Daniel 5, 6 through 9, I want you to think about this question. Is this a change of heart here from Belshazzar? Or just a realization of the reality of the situation and his actions? And then I have here, the first step is admitting you have an issue. The first step really is saying, man, I am prideful. I got to step down. Look at 5, 6 through 9. It says here, then the king's countenance was changed. Now, this is after the writing on the wall. And his thoughts troubled him, so that the joints of his loins were loosed, and his knees smote one against another. That's always a great visual. Do you ever see those cartoons where the knees are, and they're knocking together? This is exactly what happened here. The king cried aloud to bring in the astrologers and the Chaldeans and the soothsayers, and the king spake and said to the wise men of Babylon, whosoever shall read this writing and show me the interpretation thereof shall be clothed with scarlet and have a chain of gold about his neck, and shall be the third ruler in the kingdom. Then came in all the king's wise men, but they could not read the writing, nor make known to the king the interpretation thereof. Then was King Belshazzar greatly troubled, and his countenance was changed in him, and his lords were astonished. And what I want you to see is here, is it here that he really has a change of heart and that's why he's scared? Or is it just a realization of, oh man, this ain't good. I ain't never seen that. And then he yells for all the soothsayers and the astrologers. He says, hey, guys, I got a problem. And then they all come in and they look at it and say, yeah, we don't know what that is. Now it's really scary. Now it's really scary. Sometimes make sure you don't, when we're all buried up with pride, we don't get to the point where now God finally has our attention. If you have a change of heart, make sure it's not just because you're scared and you want to get out of the situation. Have a change of heart because God really impressed upon you to say, man, I need to change what I'm doing. It's two totally different reactions. Totally different reactions. In number 4, we see here Babylon had enjoyed prosperity, but the Medes and the Persians were about to overthrow them. And we're going to get more into the Medes and the Persians and the Greeks and Rome as we get into chapter 7 and beyond. But the Medes and Persians were about to come in and overthrow Babylon. And here Nebuchadnezzar, this is important, Nebuchadnezzar, who we read about in chapter 4, he died in 562 BC. All right? 562 BC. This, in the time of this writing, was roughly between 545 and 539 BC. So it's been almost 2 decades since Nebuchadnezzar had passed away. 2 decades in this kingdom. All right? And now, if you go in letter A, what I want you to see is here, Daniel was there for decades. Decades. Could you imagine having Daniel in front of you, and he was over a lot of the provinces, just as we know from chapters 1 through 3. He was put over a lot of the provinces, a lot of the governors. They had Daniel's example for decades. And if we continue to read in the story here, and you're going to see it as we get through it, Belshazzar said, I don't know who this Daniel is, but sure, let's bring him in. That's a problem. Yeah. If you have a great example, and he's right in front of you for 20, 30 years, 40 years, you really should it should rub off at some point. Should rub off at some point. And then letter B, just so you know, Belshazzar is the grandson of Nebuchadnezzar. It says here that, he says, of my father Nebuchadnezzar. In the Bible, in that translation, it's actually grandfather. It was Nebuchadnezzar's daughter married King Nebulus, who then had Belshazzar. It's a long story. It's fun to get into all these lineages. But Belshazzar is the grandson of Nebuchadnezzar. It kind of, yeah.
His name was also, in the Bible, it's called Evil Murdoch.
Mm-hmm.
That's what his name was.
Yeah, yep. Also known as Evil Merodach. Yep, I believe. Yep. It's funny because he was the grandson of Nebuchadnezzar. How much of a testimony did Nebuchadnezzar have with his kids and then down to his grandkids? It's worth discussing in your mind to say, hey, how strong is your testimony with your kids or with your grandkids or with your future generations? That they would know, hey, my grandpa used to do this and my dad used to do this and now I know why. And so, you know what, maybe this is the route that I want to take. So it's worth a discussion. We're not going to get into it here, but just something for you to think about. Look at Daniel 5:10 through 16. Oh, yes. It says, now the queen, by reason of the words of the king and his lords, came into the banquet house, and the queen spake and said, O king, live forever. Let not thy thoughts trouble thee, nor let thy countenance be changed. There is a man in thy kingdom, in whom is the spirit of the holy gods, and in the days of thy father light and understanding and wisdom. So his wife knew, the queen knew, in Nebuchadnezzar's days, there was this guy. He had a lot of understanding. He was real, like all the hubbub was about him. like the wisdom of the gods was found in him, whom the king Nebuchadnezzar thy father, the king, I say thy father, made master of the magicians, astrologers, Chaldeans, and soothsayers. So here we see, and then of course he reaches out and says, hey, let's go call this guy. So here we see the ask. All right, this is the ask. Now they need help. Now they're going to ask. I want you to, all right, look at 17 through 23. It says, then Daniel answered and said before the king, let thy gifts be to thyself and give thy rewards to another. I will read the writing unto the king and make known to him the interpretation. O thou king, the most high God gave Nebuchadnezzar thy father a kingdom and majesty and glory and honor. And for the majesty that he gave him, all people, nations, and languages trembled and feared before him. Whom he slew, and whom he kept alive, and whom he would he set up, and whom he would he put down. But when his heart was lifted up and his mind hardened in pride, he was deposed from his kingly throne, and they took his glory from him. And he was driven from the sons of men, and his heart was made like the beasts. And then look down at verse 22. And thou, his son Belshazzar, hast not humbled thine heart, though thou knewest all this. Oh, he says, whoa, you know what happened to your grandfather. Don't you remember the 7 years he was out there, he was eating grass with the cows? Kind of hard to forget because all the servants drove right by him on their chariots. It was kind of embarrassing to have the king out there in the middle of the yard eating grass. Don't you remember that? That's what Daniel is saying. But look at verse 23. But hast lifted up thyself against the Lord of heaven. Ooh, this is the honest report. Number 7, Daniel pulls no punches. He said, you know the history, you know what happened, and you defiled God. You know exactly what happened. And then in Daniel 5:24 through 31, number 8, the message was delivered. And we're going to get into each message here as we go through, so I'm not going to read that portion. Look at Daniel 5:25 and 26. Now we see the message. What was the special delivery? And this is the writing that was written, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin. This is the interpretation of the thing. Mene, God hath numbered thy kingdom and finished it. Right here is where this message changes from Belshazzar to us. Just so you know. Because if you're filled up with pride and you're defiling God and you are defying his calling and you are not doing what he wants you to do, you may as well expect a package that reads Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin. This is what it means. In number 9, Mene is God called your number. God called your number. Letter A of... Look over at Galatians, or don't. That's okay. You can just follow along with me and then look at it later. Galatians 6:7 says, be not deceived. God is not mocked. He's not mocked. You might think you're mocking him, but he says, wait till I mock you. God is not mocked. For whatsoever a man soweth, that's so he's going to reap. You're going to reap what you sow. Letter A, you do not want to be in this position. Turn to him right now. If you're hearing Mene, Mene, which means it's doubled, he stated it double because of why? Does anyone know? Anyone know why God said Mene, Mene? Emphasizing. Emphasis. He's saying, Mene, you're numbered. Mene, you're really numbered. Your time is up. You're done. I've had enough. I've had enough. Be careful when God calls your number. Daniel 5:27 says, Tekel, thou art weighed in the balances and art found wanting. Wanting. In number 10, Tekel means weighed and found wanting. In Jeremiah 17:10, you only go back like 2 books, so that's Pretty easy. Jeremiah 17:10. It says, I, the Lord, search the heart. I try the reins, even to give every man according to his ways and according to the fruit of his doings. You know what that means? You're going to reap what you sow. It's almost the same way of saying you're going to reap what you sow. In Jeremiah 17:10, we see God is going to try our hearts to see what we truly love and live for. Sadly, most will be found wanting at the end. They're going to be wanting love. They're going to be wanting friendship, wanting praise, wanting gold, wanting glory. We all want things. I want. All except for what we are to truly want, which is, of course, God himself. God himself. So you got mene, tekel, and then Perez, which is Upharsin. It's a translation. Verse 28, Perez, thy kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. And you say, Mark, how does that apply to us? I don't have to worry about the Medes and the Persians. We're in America. Woo, America. No, we do have a problem. Number 11, Perez, your kingdom will be divided as well. Don't think your kingdom's not going to be divided. And you say, haha, Mark, I don't even have a kingdom. But we do. We do. Letter A, your family is first. Your family is first. Look at Exodus 11. Exodus 11, and this is where it gets this is where it really starts to come home. Exodus 11, verses 4 through 6. It says, and Moses said, thus saith the Lord, about midnight will I go out into the midst of Egypt, and all the firstborn in the land of Egypt shall die. This is, of course, the Passover. From the firstborn of Pharaoh that sitteth upon his throne, even unto the firstborn of the maidservant that is behind the mill, and all firstborn of beasts, and there shall be a great cry throughout all the land of Egypt, such as there was none like it, nor shall be like it anymore. This is, of course, the great Passover, where you had to obey to put the blood on the doorposts, or your oldest was going to die. There was no special consideration for God. God said, I told you what to do. You're going to get a young lamb in the first year, perfect lamb, has to have no blemishes. You're going to kill it. You're going to put the blood on the doorpost. If there's no blood, your oldest is going to die. That's it. That's why the oldest of the cows died. That's why the oldest of Pharaoh died, because he certainly didn't do it. But even in Israel, I wonder how many died, because they said, I'm not doing that. I'm going to protect my kid. Good luck. Your family will be divided. Sometimes in the worst way. Sometimes in the worst way. How about your friends? Your friends. And again, guys, we've talked about this, where nothing we do is in a vacuum. Everything we do touches everybody that we know. Everything we do touches somebody in some way. So when I fall, you fall. And you might say, well, I'm not going to fall. That's exactly how you're going to fall. Is because you're falling right into the pride trap. And so your kingdom of your family can be divided, your friends, your earthly goals versus your heavenly desires. They get divided. They get divided. There is division. So mene, tekel, upharsin happens to all of us if we're not careful. If we're not careful. All right, look at Daniel 5, 30 and 31. This one here is very sobering. It says, in that night was Belshazzar, the king of the Chaldeans, slain. In that night. So he saw the vision, called the soothsayers. They said, we have no idea. Called Daniel. Daniel came in, said, many, many tekel upharsin. He went through all these things, and then he was dead. It happened that fast. That fast. And Darius the Mede took the kingdom and being about 62 years old. Here we see in number 12 of God's word came to pass. And this is something I want to make sure that we do have in mind consistently. Look over at Psalms. I'm going to leave this here. Look over at Psalms 119. Psalm 119 is hard to miss. If you split your Bible right down the middle, you'll probably fall into Psalm 119. Psalm 119, 160. Don't worry, I'm going to get there. It's a long book. All right. Or a long chapter. It says, thy word is true from the beginning, and every one of thy righteous judgments endureth forever. What I want us to remember here is not just his positive promises come to pass. You do understand every promise in the Bible is going to happen. I'm going to open to you the windows of heaven. Woo, I like that one. Whosoever shall call upon the name of the Lord shall be saved. Woo, I like that one. If you don't put the blood on the doorpost, your oldest is going to die. I don't believe that one. That one's dumb. Not only the positive ones come to pass. The warnings come to pass too. The wrath of God is promised. All you have to do is show up on Wednesday nights. Pastor's going through the book of Revelation. Woo, that is a good study. Wrath of God is going to come to pass. And then Daniel 5:22, and this is where we're going to wrap up. I pray none of us have a special delivery coming. It makes for a great story. You do understand Daniel 5 is a great story. It's a wonderful to read that, oh, wow, this king, and he was defiling God, and man, he was so dumb, and then they didn't even know who Daniel was, and then he died. And then a new kingdom came in. But it's a terrible real life event. Great story, but I don't want it to happen to any of us. Now you know all this as well. Do you have a special package coming? Lord, I hope not. Whew. Next week, we got Daniel. Next week we are combined, no class. And then the week after, Daniel 6, Daniel and the Lion's Den. It's way more than a lion story. All right, guys. Yep, you can go ahead and